All right. Do you prefer the instructions in English?
English, please.
Yeah, all right. Each team has 20 minutes to present its case to the judges. The time is indicated on the timer as we count down, right here. In case of a problem, I will indicate the remaining of the time with posters. If you do not end the presentation after 20 minutes, it will be stopped to move on to the period of questions. A period of questions of a maximum duration of 5 minutes is assigned to the jury at the end of the presentation. I would like to remind the jury that it's mandatory to ask at least one question during this period. Please note that you cannot reveal the name of your city or university, as you may be disqualified. I would like to ask the public to turn off their cell phone. I will now invite the judges to introduce themselves.
Daniel Plamondon.
Isabelle.
Dave Gelina.
Amélie de Chalet. Marilyn de Chemin.
Le domaine d'investissement en infrastructure représente un ensemble de projets structurants dans l'ensemble des sociétés au travers du monde. En ce moment, vous participez à un processus d'appel d'offres pour un projet du genre au sein de la République du Sierra. Maintenant, c'est particulièrement intéressant en raison de l'environnement de bas intérêts qui font en sorte que vos investisseurs institutionnels sont à la recherche de rendements supérieurs. Hello, my name is Zach. These are my colleagues Morgan and Josh. We are LN Consulting, and we are here to take a look at a project which we believe much resembles the planning of a vacation. So we're going to run you through looking at the destination and if you actually want to go there, what kind of budget you're on, and how and what you're going to do when you actually get there. So our mandate today was to evaluate the investment opportunity in the Republic of Sierra and to see whether or not it was the right destination for your next investment. The key considerations, so is this the right destination? Then we need to establish a budget. So at what price point are you going to bid for this project in terms of price per meter cube of water? And finally, what to do once arrived to ensure that you maximize the returns for your institutional investors. So our recommendation is actually move forward the project with a bid at the lowest bid of 69 cents euros. So to do this, we recommend a three-pronged approach. First off, securing this contract with the Republic of Sierra. Secondly, building the plant and how to operate it to maximize your revenues. And finally, we'll run you through some risk and mitigations for the different phases of this project. So hopping into the analysis. Let's take a look first off at who you are. Capino Financial Group. You manage money for institutional clients, and as we mentioned, due to the low interest rate environment, these clients are looking for high returns in new investments. You are now authorized for the past couple of years to invest in infrastructure internationally, and you do so while partnering with governments on the municipal, provincial, and federal level of these countries. Now, what's interesting here is, as mentioned, these institutional investors are in search for high return investments due to this low interest rate environment. And infrastructure represents this, while also offering an additional source of diversification for your fund. So what does infrastructure investment consist of exactly? So first off, they represent stable cash flows. These cash flows are easy to predict and have low volatility due to the secular criteria of this kind of investment. So demand does not vary with economic cycles usually, since people aren't going to stop drinking water because they have less money. They still need water in their day-to-day lives. Now, what's also interesting is that it's a hedge against inflation, because with infrastructure investment, you're able to pass on increases in your operating expenses to the end consumer or whoever is paying you, whether that be individuals of the population or the government. Also, there's low operating expenses, which decreases the effect of inflation in future years. Finally, it's a highly monopolistic and highly regulated industry due to its monopolistic nature. So since a unique player would be able to control the output, the government is required to put in place certain laws or certain agreements with these providers of services. And so, for instance, there's a max price at which they would buy water from a provider at 78 cents. So, an overview of the Republic of Syria. So, there's high population growth. There's been droughts in the past. There's been a shortage of clean drinking water due to this, both these factors. And finally, there's a new government. So, although there has been high government stability throughout the past several years, there's a new government, and this government has vowed to improve the lives of its citizens. However, the one negative aspect of this country is that there has been corruption scandals in the past. However, the government is trying to put this behind it by implementing its new ACU, anti-corruption unit. So overall, what do we take away from this? That the shortages are set to accelerate with continued population growth and increased droughts due to climate change. So this is a perfect place to build a plant such as the one you're currently considering. An overview of what PPPs are as a whole. So these allow governments to increase infrastructure investment. They also transfer the risk of construction and operation to this infrastructure provider. And they introduce competition in the monopolistic industry during the bidding phase. Overall, we also need to remember that PPPs make use of SPVs, special purpose vehicles, for these investments. And so you would be creating this entity in which you would put in your equity, in which the debt would also reside, so you wouldn't have an extra liability for this debt, and the payments from the government would transit through this SPV. So an overview of the project. A very, very important thing for this project is a clause that the government has already introduced that allows you to pass through inflation in OPEX to the government. And so if the prices of chemicals that you use to desalinize water were to go drastically up, you would be able to pass this on to the government, and so this is not a risk for your company. So you would partner with the Société de l'eau potable of Syra, and this would be your main partner for this venture. It's a 30 years, you would have 30 years of operation with an option of renewal of this contract at the end, and they would purchase it back at $28.5 million at the end of this 30-year period. This will also require the return of the debt at the end of this period. And there's a max selling price of 0.78, so you already know you'll have to bid below 78 cents, but what price should you bid at to ensure that you capture this project? So I'll now pass it on to Josh, who will take a look at what price and what budget you have in this destination.
So we've looked at what exactly is the market itself in Syria. We've seen that there's a potential for possible growth and that there's a serious need for infrastructure. But really what we need to look at is, do we have the budget? Is this project profitable? And overall, can we make a decent return as investors? And so looking at, there's a couple of key assumptions that we do want to point out right away. A WACC assumption of 11%. We believe that this is a fairly decent return given the fact that at a weighted average cost of capital of 11%, going into an international market where, for example, there's a higher risk premium because the infrastructure itself cannot be, for example, completed in time. So there's the added premium for that. Max capacity, understanding that there's 160,000 cubic meters per year in max capacity. So we need to sensitize exactly what our full capacity is and what's our implied share price. So looking at a low case, medium case, and finally a high case scenario. Using a blended mix, we will find out if, on an implied share perspective, do our equity investors actually make a decent return. So going down to our revenue forecast, we decided to use a selling price at first of 78 cents on a euro perspective at inflation of 2%. Going forward, I will use a simple term of dollar, considering that it is euro. And so with that, we decided to use on a volume of drinking purchase on a yearly perspective. We can see that there's further growth moving forward in years. On an investment cost in our initial year, how much will it really cost us? If we look at it on a perspective of what's our cost, we can see that it is about 106.4 million euros. And we do have to take into account asset retirement obligation based on the total investment. I'll dive into it later on. On an operating cost perspective, rather than looking on a full year perspective at max capacity, we decided to break it down on a cubic meter, simply because production itself is variable and we do want to have a sensible clause of what exactly this investment is worth. We do want to point out that electricity and chemicals are variable costs. The rest of it is fixed. I do want to point out that on a variable cost perspective, we decided to go with electricity rather than increasing everything at a 2%, making it a hedge-inflated investment, since revenue would increase at 2%, cost would increase at 2%, net we're at 0. But on that perspective, we decided to go with electricity about 4 to 5%. Considering that natural gas in itself is our main driver for electricity, we believe that in the years moving forward, natural gas prices will have high volatility, hence we decided to grow electrical cost at about 5% rate. And chemicals itself, we decided to move at 2% since we don't have a projected outlook of what exactly this project could entail. So on a cost perspective, that's about 53 cents per cubic meter for cost of operations. And so on a free cash flow perspective for this project, if we trickle it down to our net profits, we do have to understand that there is capital expenditure at year 5 and year 15. Those two capital expenditures being recurring all the way till the end of the project, and finally the sale of asset at $28.5 million. So on a free cash flow perspective with a WACC of 11%, we can see that if we trickle it down to our terminal free cash flow, as I said, of $28.5 million, discounting that to the 33-year time horizon, we could come down to a present value of about $820,000. Now, it seems quite attractive just on a discount perspective. But if you look at it on a total enterprise value, that's about a project worth $36.5 million. And finally, if you look at it on a cost of debt, since we are taking 50% debt, our implied equity value is about $18.28 million. And assuming that there's 1 million shares outstanding, that comes down to a share price of about $18.29. Now, there's a lot of numbers that were said, and finally, you can ask yourself, how much money am I really making on this return? We need to first consider our asset retirement obligation. Don't forget about that. So on a perspective of investment cost, we can see that in general, whether it's infrastructure, oil and gas, or in a mining business, on average, it's 5 to 10%. So 5 to 10% of your total investment costs, you need to put that into your asset retirement obligation. Big word, but really what it means is simply asset retirement obligation is the cost you need to pay either the government or the land, whatever infrastructure you're using, in order to close down that project and finally seal off and make your investment return. So on that perspective, we came down to a total value at 10%, which is the highest, so we are remaining conservative. Comes down to about 10.6 million euros. And if we present value that once again at 11%, which is our cost of capital, it comes down to about $339,000. So minusing that on our present value, and finally getting our WACC of 11%, which I want to break down right now, using a 50-50 cost of equity, since in the infrastructure business, we're not really in the leveraged buyout business such as private equity, where we want to pay down our debt and try to maximize our return, because that is a more riskier play, and since we're dealing with a more international asset, we do want to stay on a more relative side. So considering just paying our interest expense and passing it on to the next purchaser or the next buyer, in that perspective, it's a more safer play. So we assume a cost of equity of about 6% and a cost of debt of 5%. Why 5%? Simply because if we're looking at a Quebec perspective of investors, whether it's a Quebec 10-year bond, which trades about 3.4% currently, and if we're adding 2% to the fact that it's an international play, we came down to a cost of debt of 5%. So all in all, a WACC of 11%, we have a fairly positive current share price of about $18.29. But now we need to look at our low case and our high case. Well, our median case was fairly conservative, considering that we did not just take the assumptions given, we did decide to extract more out of it and really add higher inflation, whether maximizing inflation or adding higher growth to electrical cost. With that, we need to look at our low case and our high case. So today, what we're presenting to you is if you're to bid for this project on a current share price perspective, it would come down to $12.13 on a low case, and on a high case, it's about $22.73. What does that translate to an investor? If I was to tell you that the break-even price currently is about 78 cents on a selling price for the disposable water itself, our break-even point for our investment to get an NPV of 0 is 69 cents. Well, 69 cents on a euro perspective. So really, if we compare our downside to our upside, even on an infrastructure asset play, pure asset play, we still have more upside to it. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Morgan to talk about it.
So we've taken a look at the destination, we've established our budget. Now, let's see what are we going to do there in order to maximize our returns and have a bit of fun. Alright, so just a quick summary of what we are going to be looking at in the implementation section of the presentation. We're basically going to split it up in 4 sections. The bid phase, the build phase, the running phase, and finally the maintenance phase, followed by some risk and mitigation. Throughout the implementation, we know that prices cannot be raised, and we were asked to find some creative ways to increase the profitability of the overall project. So this can be done through 2 ways. First of all, costs can be minimized or optimized, and secondly, the capital structure can be altered like my colleague Joshua said. So, starting off with the bid phase, sorry it's a little bit dark there, but we suggest that you submit an initial bid of in the range of 79 cents, but in euros, per cubic meter of water. This is a bit lower than their maximum price, which still makes the offer attractive, but in the case that there's a higher offer from another competitor, you still have 6 cents of leeway where you can raise your offer by accepting a lower price from the government. So that is what we suggest you do in the eventuality of a bidding war. You can go all the way down to the minimum price of 69 cents per metric cube of water. Another point that we recommend you go through during this process, given the recent scandals in this country, is to establish very thorough due diligence. And lastly, the last part of the bidding phase will be the preparation of the construction process once the deal is secured, by assembling an on-site management team and assuring that everything goes according to plan in a timely manner. The build phase. So the first step of the build phase will be locating the perfect contractor to take on the project. So we've outlined a couple considerations that we think are going to be important when you start your search for the perfect contractor. First of all, we suggest you implement a bonding insurance clause, which is basically a fancy word that means in the eventuality that the contractor does not finish the project by 2022, he would have to pay you a certain premium depending on how long it would take to complete thereafter. Another creative way to align the incentives of your fund and the contractor would be to offer the company that's building the plant a certain percentage of shares of your special purpose vehicle. So the contractor would become an investor. What this would do is it incentivizes the contractor to deliver a well-built, low-maintenance cost plant in a timely manner. Moving on to the maintenance phase. So what's important to consider here is the pumps and membranes that are present in the desalinization plant. They represent an initial cost of 12.5 million euros, and the pumps will need to be replaced once throughout the 30-year lifespan of the project, and the membranes will need to be replaced 6 times. We've outlined this because we see that in the future decades, the number of desalinization plants in Europe and the surrounding area is drastically on the rise. What this, the impact of this is that the demand for these pumps and membranes is going to go up. So in order to maximize your capacity and make sure that your plant is running 24 hours a day, we suggest that you secure long-term maintenance contracts to mitigate these supply shortages. Lastly, let's take a look at the running phase. So the key considerations of the running phase is that the energy required to power your plant, as well as the chemicals required to remove the salt from the water, represent 84% of your annual operating costs. So this is obviously a very big chunk of operating the plant, and the potential price volatility of the inputs represents a very big risk. So there's 2 ways you can mitigate this risk. First of all, by securing long-term contracts with the local electricity supplier, the NEAS, and entering into contact with a long-term chemical supplier, such as Bayer, who operates in the region. Another way you could counteract this is to negotiate with the government and implement a clause that adjusts the sale price of your water. Instead of constantly hiking it at 2% like inflation, it would be hiked by the inflation of your inputs as opposed to a general basket of goods. Lastly, let's take a look at some risks and mitigations. So first of all, we know that you have an inexperienced president attempting his first project. We have his background a little bit. We know he's a former pop singer, but we don't know if he has any experience in the infrastructure sector. So gauging the president's receptivity to advice and just attempting to seize whether he'll be receptive to constructive criticism is going to be a big part of the project, as this is a public-private partnership. We can go over the last few points of the risks in the Q&A. And overall, just to recap, we've assessed that this is an ideal destination to go to. We've assessed our budget, and we've seen what we're going to do there. So, nous vous remercions de votre attention et nous sommes prêts à répondre à vos questions.
Just for the volatility, in the first time we are speaking, there is no volatility. So there is low volatility, but in the end you are speaking about there is some volatility in the price of the electricity and also the price of chemical products.
Yeah.
Yes, can you give me some?
Sure, of course, it's a good question. So essentially there's a lot of volatility in the cash flows received from the government. Where there can be volatility is in the price of the inputs. Now you are allowed to adjust the prices, the price you sell your water at according to the contract you'll have with the government, but there may be delays with this, which is why the volatility within the inputs in terms of prices are still relevant and still need to be mitigated with long-term contracts for the electricity and for the chemicals.
Indexed by, for example, the price will be indexed by the...
Yeah, it will be indexed progressively over the years, but there may be a delay if there's a large spike in the price of chemicals, for instance.
Okay.
Somewhere in your calculations, you mentioned that the capex for the membranes and the pumps are going to be about 12.5 million, but that's according to the case. It's that's only the pumps. Did you also take into account the membranes? Because your NPV seems a bit on the high side of the.
No.
Yes, so to answer your question, we did take into account the pumps and the membranes, and
Okay.
overall it come out to about $21.5 million. The reason why we didn't project it, we projected it forward, but just to present, just question of aesthetics, we didn't project the full 33-year onto your PowerPoint. But overall, it was taken into account, the $21.5 million. And the reason why there is such a slightly higher NPV on that perspective is that we also took into account the adjusted inflation, due to the fact that the cost itself, we believe that the cost of the pumps in year 5, year 15, and for the membranes itself at every recurring 5 years would have a change. And so that's the reason why we could have a slightly higher NPV.
If the pumps and the membranes are higher in price, you would have a lower NPV.
Yeah, so essentially, we believe that there's going to be more desalinization plant in Europe moving forward,
Okay.
which would decrease the price of the pumps.
Okay.
Est-ce que je peux poser une question au français avec une réponse en anglais? Vous avez un Asset Retirement Obligation Cost. J'essaie de comprendre pourquoi vous l'avez inclus, parce qu'à la fin, on vend l'usine, donc il n'y a pas de mise en service d'aucune immobilisation.
Oui, alors, la raison pourquoi on a décidé d'acheter la Asset Retirement Obligation, désolé si je
Non,
le terme en
c'est
français,
vraiment en anglais.
c'est vraiment dû pour le fait que même si on le vend à la fin de l'année, juste dans l'industrie de l'infrastructure en général, si on décidait de vendre une infrastructure de cette grandeur, the obligation itself would really have to be paid off before the buyer takes into account.
Okay.
Parce que, si je peux dire en mot simple, c'est vraiment, un acheteur ne voudrait vraiment pas acheter une infrastructure de cette quantité-là ou de cette grandeur de taille, en sachant que sa première année, il devrait payer sur 28,5 millions de dollars pour l'acheter et de plus faire des Asset Retirement Obligations avec le gouvernement. Alors, ce n'est pas un attrait pour l'acheteur lui-même. Alors, c'est une raison pourquoi il décidait de ne pas payer 28,5, mais il décidait de payer un peu moins cher, disons 21 ou 20, dépendamment de c'est quoi le coût de la valeur.
Même, je veux continuer sur la même question, même si on est dans 30 ans, 28 millions, dans 30 ans, c'est pas comme 28 millions aujourd'hui.
Oui,
c'est très, très petit. Là.
Oui, c'est en valeur de l'argent, mais il faut aussi comprendre que le Asset Retirement Obligation à 10 %, on a décidé de le discount à environ 11 %, ce qui donne environ 339 000 euros en perspective.
Dans votre évaluation de l'action, vous faites l'évaluation de la compagnie, là, de la nouvelle entreprise. Est-ce que c'est ce que vous comprenez comme l'évaluation, est-ce que c'est la net present value, ça?
Oui. On a décidé c'est le net present value en tant que tel, mais on a décidé de le montrer sur un share price perspective, juste parce que plus tard, si on voudrait diversifier notre projet en share perspective, on pourrait possiblement diluer notre projet en le vendant à joint venture à d'autres parties. Alors, sur ce cas-là, on a décidé de le montrer vraiment sur un share perspective. Si je le regarde directement sur l'implied equity value, c'est vraiment votre net present value en termes.
So basically, we don't have finance to finance the project.
Correct. Well, in the perspective that if we are to assume 50% debt level, what we're showing is that.
Close enough.
Merci.